Your shed is an unauthorized structure, and as you have repeatedly refused to comply with community standards, the association has exercised its right to remedy the violation at your expense. You'll receive the bill for the demolition, plus a significant fine for noncompliance. Have a blessed day, Mr. Garrison. The voice on the other end of the phone, belonging to our HOA president, Karen Bishop, was so syrupy sweet it could give a man diabetes, but the venom underneath was unmistakable. I stood there on my own property, phone pressed hard against my ear, staring at a splintered pile of lumber and shattered memories where my workshop used to be. The scent of freshly cut pine and sawdust, a smell that had always meant peace to me, was now mingled with the acrid stench of destruction. My tools, collected over 30 years of service and a lifetime of hobbies, were either smashed or buried under the wreckage. More importantly, the half-finished rocking horse I was carving for my granddaughter, a project my late wife Sarah had designed before she passed, was now just a heap of kindling. They hadn't just torn down a building, they had bulldozed a part of my soul. This is the kind of nightmare you hear about but never believe could happen to you, an abuse of power so blatant it feels like something from a movie. But it was real and it happened to me. If you've ever dealt with a power-tripping HOA board or a neighborhood tyrant who thinks they're a god, stick around. You're going to want to see how this ends. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, or share your own HOA horror story. It's time people like Karen learned that you don't get to destroy a man's life and just walk away. The thing about cornering a man with nothing left to lose is that you've just given him a new mission. My mission from that moment forward was to make Karen Bishop regret the day she ever learned my name. And I was going to use the very rules she loved to weaponize against her to do it. The war had been declared, not by me, but by her actions. And as a retired Army Corps of Engineers colonel, I knew a thing or two about strategy, patience, and seeing a mission through to its conclusion, no matter the cost. She had just demolished a shed. I was about to dismantle her entire empire. It all started 5 years ago when I bought this land. It wasn't a subdivision. It was a 5-acre plot of rolling hills just outside the city limits, a place where I could finally build the home Sarah and I had sketched on napkins for decades. We closed on the land a month before my retirement ceremony. For the first 2 years, it was paradise. I built the main house myself with the help of a few buddies from my old unit. Then I built the workshop, a sturdy 20 by 30 foot structure at the far edge of the property line, nestled against a stand of old oak trees. It was my sanctuary. It was where I kept my tools, my project blueprints, and most importantly, my connection to Sarah after she lost her battle with cancer. The property was perfect. No neighbors breathing down my neck, no covenants, no one to tell me what color I could paint my door. It was freedom, the very thing I had spent 30 years defending. But freedom, I was about to learn, is a fragile thing. The city expanded, as cities do. A developer bought the 100 acres surrounding my plot and carved it up into a master-planned community called Willow Creek Estates. Suddenly, my quiet patch of country was an island in a sea of beige houses with identical landscaping. I didn't mind mostly. I kept to myself, and the new neighbors seemed pleasant enough. That is, until Karen Bishop moved in 2 doors down and decided our little slice of suburbia needed a firm hand to guide it toward aesthetic perfection. Karen was a woman who moved through the world as if it were a slightly disappointing hotel she was considering leaving a bad review for. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair and a wardrobe consisting entirely of pastel-colored tracksuits that strained at the seams. She saw the new, unorganized neighborhood not as a community of families, but as a blank canvas for her ambition. Within 6 months, she had canvassed, cajoled, and cornered enough residents to form a homeowners association. I, of course, refused to join. My property was never part of the Willow Creek development. My deed was recorded years before the HOA was ever a glimmer in Karen's eye. I explained this to her politely when she came to my door with her petition, a clipboard held like a scepter. "Mr. Garrison," she'd said, her smile not reaching her eyes, "an HOA is for the good of everyone. It protects property values." I just smiled back. "Ma'am, I protected my property values by building a solid house on a good foundation. I don't need a committee to tell me how tall my grass should be." Her smile tightened. It was the first time I saw the flicker of the tyrant behind the facade. I had challenged her authority, and she would never forget it. I didn't know it then, but I had just made a powerful enemy, and she was the type of enemy who thrived on petty warfare. The first notice arrived a month later, a crisp white envelope in my mailbox. It was a violation for unapproved landscaping, citing the wildflowers I let grow near the tree line. Sarah had loved those flowers. I threw the notice in the trash. This was just the opening salvo in what would become a relentless, years-long campaign of harassment, a bureaucratic siege designed to break me. Karen couldn't force me into her HOA, but she was determined to make my life so miserable that I would either surrender or leave. The shed, my sacred space, would become her ultimate target, the symbol of my defiance. It stood just inside my property line, clearly visible from her back porch, a rustic, wooden testament to a freedom she could not tolerate. The first official attack on the shed came in the form of a certified letter, a document thick with self-importance. It claimed the structure was in violation of a newly minted HOA bylaw regarding accessory buildings. The bylaw, which I later learned was written by Karen herself and pushed through a sparsely attended Tuesday morning board meeting, dictated that all outbuildings must be pre-approved by the Architectural Control Committee, a committee of one Karen. It also stipulated that sheds must match the primary residence in color and roofing material. My workshop was stained a dark cedar, a stark contrast to the bland beige of the surrounding houses. It was, in her eyes, an aesthetic crime of the highest order. The letter gave me 30 days to submit a request for retroactive approval, which would include a non-refundable application fee of $500 and a detailed plan to bring the shed into compliance. Failure to do so, it warned in bold, underlined text, would result in daily fines of $100. I read the letter, and for the first time I felt a cold knot of anger tighten in my gut. This wasn't about property values. This was a power play. My shed had been standing for 2 years before her HOA even existed. It was a pre-existing structure, grandfathered in by any reasonable legal standard. Her retroactive application of a new bylaw was not just absurd, it was illegal. I didn't storm over to her house. I didn't make an angry phone call. My training taught me to never react emotionally in a conflict. Instead, I gathered my documents, my property deed, the building permits for the house, and the shed, dated and stamped by the county, and a timeline of the Willow Creek development. Then I called my old friend, Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been a JAG officer in the Army, one of an elite group of military lawyers. Now he ran a private practice specializing in property law. He was sharp, ruthless in the courtroom, and had a deep-seated hatred for bullies. I laid out the situation for him over the phone. I could hear him typing as I spoke. "Let me get this straight, Colonel," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This woman, Karen, formed an HOA after you were already established, and now she's trying to retroactively enforce a brand new rule on your pre-existing structure?" "That's the long and short of it, Marcus," I replied. There was a pause, and then he let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is a classic case of overreach. She's so high on her own petty power, she can't see the cliff she's about to run off." He advised me to send a formal, legally structured response via certified mail. The letter would politely but firmly state my position, that my property was not legally subject to the HOA's covenants, that the shed was a pre-existing, legally permitted structure, and that any attempt to find me or enter my property would be met with swift legal action. "We're building a paper trail, Colonel," Marcus explained. "We need to show that you made a good faith effort to inform her of the legal reality. When she ignores it, and she will ignore it, her actions will be willful and malicious. That's where we get her." So I typed up the letter, citing the relevant state property codes Marcus had given me. I attached copies of my deed and permits. I sent it via certified mail with a return receipt requested. A week later, the little green card came back with Karen Bishop's signature scrawled across it. She had received my warning. Her response was silence. The fines, however, started arriving like clockwork. Every week, a new envelope from the Willow Creek Estates HOA with an updated invoice. First, it was the daily fines for the shed. Then, new violations appeared. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 2 hours too long on trash day. A small vegetable garden I kept behind the house was an unapproved agricultural use of a residential lot. An American flag I flew from my porch was, according to one notice, improperly illuminated after dusk, despite the dedicated solar light I had installed right above it. It was a war of attrition. She was trying to bury me in paper, to wear me down with 1,000 tiny cuts. I saved every letter, every invoice, in a growing file I labeled the Karen campaign. I didn't pay a dime. I knew that acknowledging the fines in any way could be construed as accepting the HOA's authority. Marcus had been clear: do not engage, only document. The pressure was mounting and I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on me. Some neighbors, the ones who had bought into Karen's vision of a pristine, orderly world, would give me cold looks. Others seemed sympathetic but were too afraid to speak up, lest they become her next target. I was an island of defiance, and Karen was raising the tide, determined to wash me away. The breaking point was inevitable. I just didn't realize how destructive it would be. The final warning, if you could call it that, was a notice plastered directly onto the door of my workshop. It was printed on bright red paper, the color of alarm, and sealed in a plastic sleeve. Final notice of remediation, it screamed in a massive, bold font. This unauthorized structure will be removed by the association in 72 hours in accordance with community bylaws. All costs associated with the removal will be billed to the property owner. It was signed with a flourish by Karen Bishop, President, Willow Creek Estates, HOA. This was a direct declaration of war. She was no longer just threatening fines. She was threatening to invade my property and destroy my sanctuary. I called Marcus immediately. "She's actually going to do it," I said, my voice tight with a rage I was struggling to contain. "She's going to tear it down." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Okay, Colonel, this is it. This is the mistake we've been waiting for her to make. She's moving from civil harassment to criminal action. Trespassing, destruction of property. This is a game changer." His advice was precise. First, do not confront her. Do not give her any reason to claim you were threatening or aggressive. Second, you need to document everything. I want you to buy and install high-definition security cameras today. Get at least 2, with a clear view of the shed and the access point to your property. Make sure they have night vision and record to a cloud server, not just a local drive she could potentially steal. He continued. Third, and this is the hard part, you have to let it happen. I felt my blood run cold. Let it happen? Marcus, my wife, her things are in there. My tools. I know, Colonel, and I'm sorry, but her physically destroying your property is the kill shot. It takes this out of the realm of HOA squabbles and puts it squarely into a criminal court and a massive civil suit. If you intervene, it becomes a he said, she said dispute. If you let her do it on camera, it becomes an undeniable act of malicious destruction. It's the difference between winning a small claims case and winning a settlement that could bankrupt her and her entire sham organization. We have to play the long game. He was right, of course. My military mind understood the grim logic of strategic sacrifice, but my heart ached at the thought of what I was about to lose. That afternoon, I went to an electronics store and bought the best security system they had. I spent hours installing the cameras, positioning them perfectly, testing the angles and the cloud backup. As I worked, I went through the shed one last time. I carefully wrapped Sarah's gardening tools in a blanket and brought them into the house. I took photos of everything: my workbench, the shelves of carefully organized hardware, the stack of cherry wood I'd been saving for a special project, and I took a long, hard look at the little rocking horse, its head and legs still rough-hewn, its body waiting to be sanded smooth. I couldn't move it. It was too heavy, too awkward. I ran my hand over the wood, a lump forming in my throat. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I whispered. The next morning, I had a long scheduled appointment at the VA hospital in the city, a 2-hour drive away. It was a routine checkup I couldn't miss. The timing was almost too perfect, a fact that wasn't lost on me. Karen, who made it her business to know everyone's business, likely knew I'd be gone for the day. It was the perfect window of opportunity for her. As I drove away from my home, I watched my quiet street in the rearview mirror, my stomach churning. I was leaving my flank intentionally exposed, baiting the enemy into an ambush. It was a sound military tactic, but it felt like a betrayal of everything that workshop stood for. I was walking into the hospital, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, watching a live feed on my phone, waiting for the inevitable assault to begin. The notification on my phone buzzed at 10:17 a.m. Motion detected on camera 1. I was in a sterile white waiting room, surrounded by the murmur of televisions and the smell of antiseptic. I quickly pulled up the live feed. My heart hammered against my ribs. A beat-up flatbed truck with Randy's Demo and Hauling crudely painted on the side was backing into my driveway. It rumbled past my house, its tires chewing up the grass, and stopped just short of the workshop. A moment later, a golf cart pulled up behind it. It was Karen. She disembarked with the air of a conquering general, clipboard in hand. She was wearing a bright pink tracksuit and oversized sunglasses. Two rough-looking men in stained t-shirts got out of the truck. Karen pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the shed. I could see her mouth moving, her expression a mask of smug authority. She was directing them, orchestrating the destruction of my property as if she were ordering landscape improvements. I watched, helpless and hundreds of miles away, as the two men pulled out crowbars and sledgehammers. The first blow landed on the door I had built with my own hands. The sound was a dull thud, barely audible through the phone's speaker, but it echoed in my mind like a gunshot. They tore the door from its hinges. Then they went inside. I couldn't see what they were doing, but I could imagine it. They were tossing aside years of my life, my projects, my memories, with callous indifference. After a few minutes, they came back out. One of them started a chainsaw. The high-pitched scream of the engine was a sound of pure violation. They started on the walls, slicing through the timber frame. The structure that had taken me weeks to build, designed to withstand a hurricane, was being dismantled in minutes. The camera captured every detail in crystal clear high definition. The spray of sawdust, the splintering of wood, Karen standing with her arms crossed, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. At one point, she took out her phone and appeared to be taking pictures, likely to document her victory for the HOA newsletter. The worst moment came when they brought out the rocking horse. They dragged it out into the open, its unfinished form looking like a wounded animal. One of the men gave it a kick. Then with a grunt, he lifted a sledgehammer and brought it down on the horse's back. The cherry wood, so strong and beautiful, split with a sickening crack. I felt the blow in my own chest. A white-hot rage, purer and more intense than anything I had ever felt, even in combat, surged through me. My hands were shaking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to be there, to physically stop them, to make them understand the gravity of what they were destroying. But I held on to Marcus's words, "Let it happen. It's the kill shot." I saved the recording. I backed it up to 3 different cloud services. I sat in that VA waiting room, a ghost among the living, and watched as my sanctuary was reduced to a pile of rubble. When they were done, the men used a small front-end loader to scoop the debris into their truck. They raked the ground clean, leaving nothing but a barren patch of dirt where my workshop had stood. Karen did a final inspection, nodded her approval, and then drove off in her golf cart. The entire operation took less than 2 hours. By the time my name was called for my appointment, the live feed showed nothing but an empty space under the oak trees, as if my shed, and the part of my life it contained, had never existed at all. The 2-hour drive home was the longest of my life. The rage had subsided into a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer about a shed. It was about principle. It was about a fundamental violation of a man's rights, his property, his peace. Karen Bishop had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She had mistaken my patience for surrender. She was about to learn in the most public and financially painful way possible how grievously she had miscalculated. When I pulled into my driveway, the reality of it hit me again. The empty space was a gaping wound on my property. I walked over to the spot, the ground still scarred by the tires of the truck. A few splinters of wood were all that remained. I knelt and picked one up. It was a piece of the cherry wood from the rocking horse. I closed my fist around it, the sharp edges digging into my palm. This was my evidence. This was my reminder. I went inside and immediately called the sheriff's department. When the deputy arrived, a young man with a tired look in his eyes, he was initially dismissive. "Sir, this sounds like a civil matter with your HOA," he said, shifting his weight. "We don't typically get involved in these kinds of disputes." That's when I played the video. I handed him my phone, the footage already queued up. He watched, his expression slowly changing from boredom to disbelief and then to outright anger. He saw the truck, the men, and most importantly, he saw Karen Bishop, a woman he likely knew from the community, directing the entire operation. "She came onto your property without your permission and directed these men to destroy your building?" he asked, his voice now sharp and professional. "That's exactly what happened, Deputy," I said. "And I have a certified letter I sent to her weeks ago warning her that any such action would be considered criminal." I showed him the letter and the signed receipt. He took out his notebook. "What was the estimated value of the structure and its contents?" he asked. I had already done the math. I gave him a detailed, itemized list: the cost of the lumber, the roofing, the foundation, then the tools, the professional-grade table saw, the drill press, the bandsaw, the countless hand tools, many of them antique and irreplaceable, and finally the value of the specialty wood and the commissioned projects inside. The total was well over $50,000. The deputy's eyes widened. "Sir, this is felony destruction of property and criminal trespass." He took my statement, collected a copy of the video file, and assured me a detective would be in touch. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, slowly but surely. My next call was to Marcus. I sent him the video file and the police report number. He was silent for a full minute after watching it. When he finally spoke, his voice was like ice. "We've got her, Colonel. We've got her dead to rights. She's committed a felony on camera. This is the linchpin for everything. The civil suit is going to be a slam dunk." He laid out the plan. We would sue not just the HOA, but Karen Bishop personally. We would sue the other board members for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, and we would sue Randy's Demo and Hauling as co-conspirators. The lawsuit would seek compensatory damages for the full value of the shed and its contents, punitive damages for their malicious and willful conduct, and damages for emotional distress. But Marcus had a bigger idea. "We're also going to challenge the very existence of the HOA," he said. "We're going to argue it was formed under fraudulent pretenses and that its authority is illegitimate. We're not just getting you justice, Colonel. We're going to liberate that entire neighborhood." The first step was to gather more intelligence. I had been an isolated target, but I knew Karen's reign of terror couldn't have been limited to me. There had to be others. It was time to find them. The next morning I started walking the neighborhood. I went door to door, not with anger, but with a simple, quiet question. I introduced myself and asked, "Have you had any issues with the HOA?" The floodgates opened. It started with Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow in her 80s. With tears in her eyes, she showed me a stack of fines for the collection of ceramic gnomes in her flower bed. Her late husband had collected them. Karen had deemed them tacky and in violation of aesthetic standards. The fines now totaled over $2,000, and the HOA had placed a lien on her home. Then there was the Miller family, a young couple with 3 kids. They had a lien on their house for an unapproved play structure, a portable basketball hoop they rolled out onto their driveway for their sons. They had submitted an application for it, but Karen had denied it, stating it promoted a street-like atmosphere. Story after story tumbled out. A family fined because their son's graduation banner was left up for 48 hours instead of the approved 24. A man forced to repaint his entire house because the shade of beige he used was, according to Karen's paint swatches, too warm. A woman who received a violation for a nuisance animal because her small dog barked when the mailman came. It became clear that Karen wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was a predator who preyed on the vulnerable, the elderly young families, people who didn't have the resources or the will to fight back. She used fines and liens to generate revenue and to exercise absolute control. Many of them had been coerced into joining the HOA in the first place. Karen had apparently gone door to door claiming it was a mandatory city requirement for the new development. A blatant lie. They had signed under duress, afraid of legal trouble. I took notes on every story. I collected copies of their violation notices, their fines, their desperate unanswered emails to the board. I organized it all into a dossier, a mountain of evidence detailing a clear and undeniable pattern of abuse, harassment, and fraud. I found a fellow veteran, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant named Frank, who had been fighting Karen over the placement of his satellite dish for months. When he saw my video, his face hardened. "That woman needs to be stopped, Colonel," he said, his voice a low growl. "You tell me what you need." He became my lieutenant. Together, we organized a neighborhood meeting. We booked a small room at the local library, not wanting to host it in anyone's home, where Karen's spies, and we were sure she had them, could watch. We expected maybe 10 people to show up. Over 50 came. The room was packed, a cross-section of the entire community, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and a desperate hope for change. I stood at the front of the room, laid out the facts of my case, and played the video of my shed's demolition on a projector. A collective gasp went through the room. They had all received her paper threats, but seeing her vile orders carried out in living color was something else entirely. It made the threat real. For the first time, they saw that her power wasn't just in fines and letters. It was in her willingness to cross any line to get her way. It was the spark that lit the fuse of a rebellion. With the evidence from my neighbors compiled, Marcus filed the lawsuit. It was a legal masterpiece, a 60-page document that landed like a bombshell on Karen Bishop's perfectly manicured lawn. The process server delivered one copy to her personally at her home, one to each of the other 3 board members, and one to the ramshackle office of Randy's Demo and Hauling. The lawsuit had 4 main counts. Count 1 was against all defendants for the destruction of my property, seeking $55,000 in actual damages. Count 2 was for trespassing. Count 3 was against Karen and the HOA for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for which we sought $100,000. Count 4 was the big one, a class action claim on behalf of myself and 27 other families against the HOA for fraudulent formation, racketeering, and a pattern of illegal fines and liens. We were not just asking for damages, we were asking the court to dissolve the HOA entirely and nullify every fine and lien it had ever issued. The lawsuit demanded a jury trial. Karen's immediate reaction was predictable. The HOA's lawyer, a slick, overconfident man who likely handled slip-and-fall cases, sent Marcus a dismissive letter calling our lawsuit frivolous and an attempt to bully the association. He demanded we withdraw it immediately or face a countersuit for legal fees. Marcus's response was simple. He attached a link to the video of the demolition, which we had uploaded to a private server, with a simple message: "See you in discovery." That's when things got quiet. Too quiet. For 2 weeks, there was no response. The HOA's lawyer had clearly seen the video and understood the catastrophic position his clients were in. The discovery process began, and it was a bloodbath. Marcus subpoenaed every email, text message, and internal communication from Karen and the other board members related to me or any of the other plaintiffs. The digital trail she left was damning. We found emails where she referred to me as the stubborn old soldier and outlined her plan to make his life a living hell until he sells or submits. We found text messages where she laughed about Mrs. Gable's ugly little gnomes and bragged about the lien. Most damning of all was an email to the board sent the day before the demolition. In it, she acknowledged receiving my certified letter from her so-called lawyer friend, but dismissed it as a pathetic bluff. She wrote, "He will be out of town for his VA appointment. It is the perfect time to remove the eyesore once and for all. We must show the community that defiance has consequences." She had admitted in writing to knowing her actions were legally contested and to intentionally waiting until I was away to destroy my property. It was a confession. It proved malice aforethought, which was the key to unlocking massive punitive damages. While the legal battle churned, we decided to open a second front, the court of public opinion. Frank the Marine knew a reporter at a local news station, a young, ambitious journalist named Sarah Jenkins, who loved stories about an underdog fighting the system. We gave her the entire package, the video, the lawsuit, the stories from the neighbors, and copies of Karen's most egregious emails. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. It opened with the shocking footage of my shed being torn down, with Karen Bishop standing there like a Roman emperor at the games. They showed a picture of me in my dress uniform, identifying me as a retired colonel. They interviewed a tearful Mrs. Gable about her gnomes and the lien on her home. They interviewed the Miller family, whose son stood beside them, looking sadly at the basketball hoop now locked away in their garage. Sarah Jenkins presented the story masterfully, painting a clear picture of a community held hostage by a tyrannical HOA president. The station's phone lines lit up. The story was posted on their website and social media channels, and it exploded. Within 24 hours, it had been shared thousands of times. It was picked up by national news aggregators. The comments section was a torrent of outrage directed at Karen and the Willow Creek HOA. People from all over the country shared their own HOA horror stories. We had tapped into a deep well of public resentment against a system that so often felt abusive and unaccountable. Karen, in her infinite arrogance, agreed to an on-camera interview, believing she could spin the narrative. It was a disaster of epic proportions. She came across as condescending, defensive, and completely devoid of empathy. When asked about demolishing my shed, she said, "Mr. Garrison is a rule breaker. We have rules for a reason, to protect the aesthetic integrity of our community." He was given ample warning. When the reporter pressed her, asking if she believed she had the right to destroy a man's private property, she snapped, "As president of the association, I have the right and the duty to enforce the bylaws that he chose to ignore." The clip went viral. She became a meme, the embodiment of the Karen archetype. Her smug, defiant face was plastered all over the internet. The public humiliation was total. The pressure on the HOA's insurance company became immense. They were now facing a high-profile lawsuit with undeniable video evidence and a defendant who was making herself a national villain. Their risk exposure was growing exponentially with every news cycle. The call from the insurance company's lawyers came on a Friday afternoon. They wanted to schedule a settlement conference. Marcus had been expecting it. "They're bleeding," he told me over the phone. "The negative press is costing them a fortune, and they know they have zero chance of winning in front of a jury. They're ready to cut their losses." The settlement meeting was held at a neutral law office downtown. I was there with Marcus. On the other side of a massive mahogany table sat Karen, the other board members, and a team of grim-faced lawyers in expensive suits. Karen refused to make eye contact with me, staring resolutely at a water pitcher in the center of the table. Her usual air of supreme confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. The lead insurance lawyer, a man named Henderson, did all the talking for their side. He started with a lowball offer. "Our clients are prepared to offer Mr. Garrison $20,000 to compensate for the value of the shed and to make this entire unfortunate misunderstanding go away." Marcus just smiled. He didn't even bother with a counteroffer. Instead, he turned to a large monitor on the wall and, without a word, played the video of the demolition. He let the entire 2-hour recording play on a loop in silence. We all sat there, forced to watch the destruction over and over. We saw the sledgehammers. We saw the chainsaw. We saw Karen's smug smile. We saw my granddaughter's rocking horse being smashed to pieces. After about the fourth loop, Henderson cleared his throat. His face flushed. "All right, we understand. Your point is made." Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm and deadly serious. "My client isn't interested in making an unfortunate misunderstanding go away. He is interested in justice. Here is our demand. It is not an opening bid. It is our final offer, and it is not negotiable." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. On it were our terms. First, a cash payment of $200,000 to me, personally. This covered the actual damages, the emotional distress, and a punitive component that would sting. Second, the HOA's insurance would pay all our legal fees, which were substantial. Third, the HOA would be responsible for nullifying every fine and removing every lien issued to the 27 other plaintiffs in our suit, with written apologies sent to each family. Fourth, Karen Bishop and the entire current board of directors would resign, effective immediately, and be barred from ever serving on a future board in the Willow Creek community. And finally, the fifth and most important term. The Willow Creek Estates HOA, Marcus read aloud from the paper, Will, at its sole expense, hire a bonded and insured contractor of Mr. Garrison's choosing to rebuild the demolished structure to its original or better specifications, on its original footprint, with all work to be completed within 30 days of the signing of this agreement. Henderson stared at the paper, his jaw tight. He looked at Karen, who was now glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He knew they had no choice. To go to trial would be to risk a jury awarding us 10 times that amount, not to mention the ongoing public relations nightmare. After a tense, whispered conference with his clients, he sighed. "We accept your terms." The agreement was signed, and just like that, the war was over. I had won. The 30 days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The settlement check was deposited into my account, a sum of money that, while significant, could never replace what was lost. The real victory was in the other terms. The letters of apology went out, and the liens were lifted. Families who had lived in fear for years were suddenly free. A special election was held, and a new HOA board was formed, led by Frank, the Marine gunny, and made up of reasonable people who understood that a community is about neighbors, not rules. They immediately set about rewriting the bylaws, stripping out all of Karen's draconian and subjective nonsense. The reign of terror was officially over. Karen Bishop put her house on the market a week after the settlement. The public humiliation was too much for her to bear. I saw her once during that time at the grocery store. She saw me, her face paled, and she abandoned her shopping cart in the middle of an aisle and practically ran out of the store. She was no longer a queen in her castle. She was a pariah in the town she had tried to rule. But the sweetest justice of all was watching the construction of my new workshop. I hired the best custom builder in the county, a man known for his meticulous craftsmanship. I gave him the original blueprints and a blank check, courtesy of the HOA's insurance policy. They built it on the exact same spot, but this time with a reinforced foundation, thicker walls, and a beautiful standing seam metal roof. Every day the construction crew was out there, their trucks a constant presence on the street. And every day until her house finally sold, Karen Bishop had to drive past the site of her greatest failure, a visible, growing monument to her own hubris. She had to watch as the thing she destroyed was rebuilt, better and stronger than before, entirely on her dime. On the day the workshop was finished, I stood in the doorway and took a deep breath. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. The builder had replicated every detail perfectly, from the placement of the windows to the style of the door. The insurance money had allowed me to replace all my tools, and my new workbench was stocked and ready. In the center of the room, on a clean canvas drop cloth, sat a large uncut block of the finest cherry wood I could find. My first project would be a new rocking horse for my granddaughter, a tribute to the one that was lost, a symbol of resilience. That evening, the neighborhood, now free and breathing easy, threw a massive block party in the street right in front of my house. Frank grilled burgers, kids ran through sprinklers, and music played. It wasn't the quiet, sterile perfection Karen had envisioned. It was loud, messy, and beautifully human. I walked out onto my porch, looking at the happy chaos, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Gable came up to me and gave me a hug. In her hands, she held a small, carefully wrapped object. "This is for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "For the new workshop?" I opened it. It was a ceramic gnome, a cheerful little figure with a fishing rod. I laughed, a real deep laugh. "I know just the place for him," I said. Later that night, long after the party had wound down, I stood in my new workshop. The gnome sat proudly on the windowsill, a tiny guardian watching over the property. I looked at the block of cherry wood, then at a photo of Sarah I had placed on the workbench. The fight had been long and ugly. It had cost me something precious. But in the end, we had won more than just a lawsuit. We had reclaimed our homes, our freedom, and our community. Karen had tried to tear us apart with rules and intimidation, but in doing so, she had only brought us closer together. She had demolished a shed, but she had inadvertently built a neighborhood. And as I picked up my tools and prepared to make the first cut, I knew that this workshop, born from the ashes of her malice, would be a place not of solitude, but of strength, a testament to the fact that no bully, no matter how powerful they think they are, is a match for a community united, and a quiet man pushed too far. The silence of the night was broken only by the gentle hum of the saw as it bit into the wood, a sound of creation where there had once been only destruction. Justice, like a well-crafted piece of furniture, takes time, patience, and a steady hand, and it is always worth the effort.